Hello! Name's Alan, welcome back to the channel, thank you very much for tuning in. Today we'll be making a tier list for which it is necessary to establish certain rule sets. Hence, I will briefly introduce my preface regarding elemental advantages, as well as the tier list evaluation criteria. So, let's get into it. Fire, in my opinion, is the strongest element in Wizard of Legend due to items like Ebonwolf's Cloak, Stanza of Flames, or Neve's Ruby specifically supporting fire damage, as well as abilities generally having an insane amount of base damage, a usually accompanying fire debuff dealing a decent chunk of damage very quickly, and a very high signature charge gain for extra damage across the board. Lightning and water or ice are the second strongest elements due to strong supportive items like Ebonwolf's Cloak or Neve's Citrine, as well as for ice, Stanza of Frost, Special Snowflake, Pandemic Pouch, and the Fuzzy Hand Warmers. Lightning pairs up very well with base damage increases and critical hit builds, while water is very strong for projectile destruction, healing, and crowd control with the Frost debuff. Earth is second to last due to poison taking too long to apply damage and generally doing a poor job of stun locking enemies. Additionally, most Earth abilities rely on crowd control, are rather slow to use, and therefore not very good into bosses. Wind, in my book, is clearly the worst element due to a huge lack of base damage on most wind abilities. Additionally, slow is the worst debuff as it does not damage, kill, nor stunlock enemies and has a rather niche use of creating space between you and your foes. Wind abilities generally are very clunky or have to be used from point blank range, making them even worse in that regard. Wind abilities generally are better when used as a supportive ability for applying slows, destroying projectiles, repelling or moving enemies, and for granting movement speed or cooldown reduction to yourself. We will be evaluating our tier list today using the following criteria in order. Ability category, useful item or Arcana synergies, base damage or effective damage dealt, coverage in terms of width and range, signature charge generation, ease of use and unique quirks, projectile destruction capabilities, and finally, status effect applications. Hi guys, we made it. I'd say let's continue on with the tier list scheme, which is fairly default looking. At the very top we have the dreaded S tier, reserved for only the best of the best, the creme de la creme, the universally good and awesome. We love to see these. These go with everything like a fine wine. Followed up by the A tier for the above average, the good and the great. Followed up by the B tier, which is anything remotely considered decent or quite average. C tier is a little bit lackluster, below average or meh, if you like short terms. And then finally, D tier is for anything that is considered to be of poor quality that you wouldn't want to get your hands on, generally speaking, or that has quite a niche to fill. Let's leave it at that. Additionally, I added an I don't know tier for anything that I lack the personal experience of giving my refined opinion on, or anything that I simply do not use whatsoever and therefore I don't have an opinion on. I may or may not state an opinion here occasionally on separate abilities, however, it is merely a guess and not one coming from a great amount of experience. Additionally, as a side note, we will be going through these icons, we will be going through these abilities in-game order, i.e. starting with the fire element and then going through element-wise from left to right throughout the in-game Wizard of Legend Arcana book, whereas here these have been inserted in alphabetical order. Some of these images, which I can assure you are perfectly square in my personal image assets folders, have been squashed beyond recognition, so this is going to be quite fun. I'll definitely have to look through this list here and find the individual abilities by heart. This is going to be quite interesting. That having been said, with all that other way, I'd say let's get started. Let's start things off with Ignition Rush. Ignition Rush is a melee dash arcana, which pairs up quite well with the Greased Boots, which is an exceptional relic that you will hear me mention a lot today, and for good reason. It's a relic that you can slap on any dash on this list, and any dash in the game period, and it's going to make that dash better, because as long as you are holding the greased boots, they will temporarily enhance whatever dash you're currently holding and slap a large amount of cooldown reduction on said ability, which means that you gain a lot of benefits from it. First of all, you are enhancing an unenhanced ability. Enhancements generally mean more coverage and more damage dealt. You are giving it cooldown reduction, that means it's a lot more versatile in how you use it. You don't have to decide between aggressive or defensive playstyle, you can just pretty much use it whenever you want. Also, cooldown reduction grants you a higher damage per second ratio, right? And additionally to all of that crap, it frees up slots in the shop. Whenever you enter a new stage with greased boots in your inventory, on paper, the game will recognize you owning the real quote-unquote enhancement of the dash you're currently holding, and it will not generate that particular enhanced ability in the Arcana shop. More likely, generating enhancements for other unenhanced abilities that you're currently carrying. So it grants you a ton of extra value, and it's easily one of the best items in the game. Besides, you can easily, which is interesting in this particular tier list context, you can easily switch between different dashes as well. They're all gonna be enhanced either way. Might as well do it, eh? If you find a better dash, come across a better dash or a more convenient dash for your particular build, just grab it. You won't be at any disadvantage. And it'll cost you a whole lot less than purchasing first an unenhanced ability and then upgrading it later, or purchasing an enhancement right out of the gates. Additionally, specific to Ignition Rush, Agni Sparkler is quite a nice item, as Ignition Rush is a non-damaging ability with the focus set to versatility, the focus set to be a status ailment applicant. We want to apply burn damage for this particular ability. We need to rush, as the name implies, through the enemies as fast as possible to apply burn damage while we can, while the duration of this ability is still, ticking down, going on. And Agni Sparkler helps us deal a lot more damage applying that status effect, as it makes the burn status effect twice as good. Pandemic Pouch additionally can help you apply this thing a whole lot more easily. You can both use this in a defensive or an aggressive manner if you wish, as well. The more enemies you can apply this to, the more enemies will be slowed down, the more enemies will be damaged and essentially stopped in their tracks, and the easier it'll be for you later on, after them having been damaged, to finish them off or keep them away from you. Hunter Stiletto can definitely help you deal single target damage with this particular ability as well, as whenever you hit an enemy that you have applied a status ailment to, or that any status ailment has been applied to in case they walked into a trap, for example, whether that be burn or poison or whatever, you will deal more damage to that enemy. Even though, keep in mind, burn is a very short-lasting, or let's say it's an ability with a mediocre duration, which also deals a mediocre amount of damage. So you won't get a whole lot of value out of Hunter Stiletto, but if you just need to kill, say, a mini-boss, for example, Hunter Stiletto definitely helps you deal a lot more damage with your other abilities. So you apply the debuff with Ignition Rush, which is the main purpose of the ability anyway, and then you gain Hunter Stiletto benefits for the duration, and when enhanced or when combined with other relics, you can maybe reapply different debuff or the same debuff faster, and then just semi-permanently gain the benefits of Hunter Stiletto being active. Additionally, I would say, since this is a very close-range melee ability, stones can be very useful, except the Wind and Frost Stone. Much to my dismay, you shouldn't use the Frost Stone with this ability, in my personal opinion, because of consistency's sake, and for the sake of your own health, really. Froststone has a little bit of a picky interaction that I am a pretty... I'm a pretty big hater of, I would say, because Froststone will freeze those big chunky black blobs of enemies, let's call them muscly golems, even though they're not, just for the sake of it, and when unfreezing them with burn, say you have applied burn previously, or you apply burn after the frost having been applied, or at the same time it doesn't really matter because status ailments stack in this game. It's not that one overrides the other. The burn will immediately damage the frozen enemy, breaking them free and effectively resetting their attack timer. You won't even see the attack coming. It might just be so fast in that particular situation that you just take a lot of damage from those chunky guys. They hit really hard. If it were like, I don't know, like the night enemy, for example, I probably wouldn't be as picky about this, but those golems, they hit really, really hard. You really need to avoid them like the plague, and those frost interactions you just shouldn't make happen whatsoever in my book. So let's not run that just in case. Windstone is pretty much the same story, but on a much more severe scale. Windstone pretty much ruins any melee-centric build. Ignition Rush just individually already gets completely screwed by Windstone as well. Though, say you are preparing an engage on a large group of enemies, there's like 30 enemies, right, for the sake of it, and Windstone might just so choose in the moment to push one of those at random away just far enough so they can interrupt you. Say it's a Lancer, that's my least favorite example here, really, because my lord, I hate Lancers. They will outrange you, especially looking just at Ignition Rush, and yeah, you don't want that. You don't want that at all. Don't let Windstones ruin your melee combos. I typically run Ignition Rush in combo builds or in melee push and pull builds. So the way I would use it is I would use it first. It has quite the long duration, right? It doesn't have a very short-lived duration. It has quite a long duration. So you have a lot of time to prepare. You just use it and then use something like a Tearing Whirlwind, for example, to pull in all the enemies, draw them in, burn them, deal damage to them so they definitely can attack you, and then rinse and repeat. Or you use it, walk through a bunch of enemies, like push them away, use it, speed yourself up with something like Scales of Babylon, for example, which is quite nice because you used it first, then you used Scales of Babylon to give you both movement speed and deal damage to them, then you burn them, right, very quickly, and Scales of Babylon also grants you cooldown reduction, so you can then go ahead and use your dash again to reapply that burn, which is quite nice. So use it preemptively before engaging, and things like Windstone definitely screw with that quite a lot, so avoid them like the plague. When unenhanced, Ignition Rush deals no damage at all, has poor coverage, it's pretty much just your character hitbox with a tiny globe around it. It grants you no signature charge generation. However, on the flip side, it is very easy to hit, it burns enemies, and it's very, very consistent at applying the status effect. It's incredibly easy to do. When enhanced, it deals slightly more damage, adds slightly more coverage, and burns enemies again. Even though it may not seem like much in the grand scheme of things, how to win your run, how to kill bosses, how to deal damage, this ability can help quite a lot, especially with rims. I find it very useful. However, against bosses, it definitely lacks some oomph. Into Sura, status ailments do nothing at all, and while it may not seem super useful, from my personal experience, I would derive that this ability can go with a lot of different builds. My favorite is a status ailment build, where I try to apply different status ailments and I combine them with, say, a pandemic pouch. That's just super fun. Slap a level rope on it and boom, you can level that rope like there's no tomorrow. As status effects don't downscale with a level rope, they don't scale up either with your base damage. They are unaffected by your base damage. So you can easily kill enemies relying on status effects. I am gonna be putting this into B tier. Most people would probably put this into below average. However, I find it to be still, even though it may not deal any damage directly, very, very useful and very expandable on. It's also a fire element, so it has a lot of support natively, but we don't count that here for the most part. And the burn debuff, damage-wise and defense-wise, it really isn't that bad. It's, I would say, middle or top of the pack, even. Right, let's move on to Searing Rush, which has been butchered quite a lot by the looks of it. Searing Rush is an undefined dash Arcana. Combines very well with cooldown reduction, so jumper cables are amazing. I love looking at that. Greased boots are quite fun with this particular ability as well. I like them a lot. Soccer cleats, when enhanced, apparently apply extra damage. Uh, I don't use this ability a whole lot. I did some research though, and this is the conclusion. So apparently Soccer Cleats actually work for the enhanced version of this ability as well. Boots of Frenzy, I personally like a whole lot with this ability. Boots of Frenzy have a chance to give you infinite charges, i.e. 99 charges on killing an enemy for a few seconds. So you will just have flaming walls everywhere, watching enemies be burned to a crisp. Pun intended. The unenhanced version of this ability is very, very similar to Ignition Rush. It deals no damage at all at poor coverage, granting you no signal to charge generation. It's easy to hit, burns enemies, and now for the greatest advantage over Ignition Rush, or the greatest comparator here, it grants you a great amount of projectile destruction, something very unique among the dash and basic arcana in the game. This thing is incredible for projectile destruction. Very, very hidden gem if you're looking for that particular niche. When enhanced, it deals decent damage at a decent coverage, grants you a tiny wee bit of signature charge generation apparently, and it burns enemies again, very similar to the Ignition Rush. So off of those stats, this thing is obviously better than Ignition Rush, right? I would still put this in B tier. I find these very similar. If your main goal is to straight up walk into enemies, Ignition Rush has got to be the winner here. Otherwise, if you just want to have a defensive ability for stopping enemies in their tracks, for slowing them down, for slowing down projectiles specifically, Searing Rush is definitely your go-to pick. I would still say Searing Rush is better because it can at least be used to deal damage, and damage is king in roguelikes because, well, a dead enemy can't attack you. They can't damage you, and that's the main goal, right? Kill everything as fast as possible. So Searing Rush is, after all, better than Ignition Rush, but still, I personally much prefer Ignition Rush. It's one of my favorite dashes in the game. Let's move on to something very exciting, Magma Rush. Magma Rush is an undefined dash arcana, which combines exceptionally well with cooldown reduction. We have a lot of different cooldown reduction items in Wizard of Legend, and all of them pretty much are applicable to this particular ability, and all of them pretty much are incredible with this particular ability. Let's start things off with the easy ones. Easy ones out of the way first. Greased boots and jumper cables. Enhance this thing, amazing. You make an amazing ability, outstanding. Great. Greased boots gains just so much value here. Jumper cables, again, so much value for free. Elemental pointe, or points, however you pronounce that word, I'm not sure what it even means. Grants you a little bit of extra cooldown reduction, flat cooldown reduction. It's not percentage-based cooldown reduction, but that can be very useful on abilities that have very low cooldowns in the first place, because a percentage of a very low cooldown is a very minute cooldown reduction, whereas like straight up shaving 1 or 2 seconds off of your dash cooldown is generally much more favorable in my opinion. So Elemental Pointe is very nice. You use this ability, you dispose of it, and you quickly use another ability anyway, so you pretty much always gain the bonus from Elemental Pointe. It doesn't have multiple charges, so you, well, by default it doesn't, so you can't fuck this up right away either. So Elemental Pointe is just mwah, chef's kiss, very nice. Ring of Reserves, speaking of charges, grants you extra charges, which can be super duper nice for this ability, because you just toss it and you forget about it, and it generates value like there's no tomorrow. Additionally, having multiple charges means you pretty much always have one up, so it's indirect cooldown reduction. Soccer Cleats are amazing for making this deal more damage. I love the Soccer Cleats on this item, on this ability. It's very, very nice. Boots of Frenzy, likewise, having more charges. It's essentially infinite charges slash infinite cooldown reduction, which is amazing because this is a stationary mine which will also home in on enemies in its immediate vicinity. Well, starting from that point, it will chase them down. That is fucking amazing. That means you just fill an entire room with these mines. You don't even have to aim whatsoever. Not at all. You just walk around, you let enemies walk around, and they will proc them left, right, and center. When they expire, they go off as well. This ability with Boots of Frenzy is just pure joy. Whereas the previous Flame Walls are already very fun to look at, Magma Rush is just insane. I love it with Boots of Frenzy. Breezy Great Canvas is nice for both the cooldown reduction and straight up just ignoring enemy attacks. Dash through, evade all of them guaranteed while you're dashing, and have the potential to immediately gain 100% of your cooldown back, i.e. completely reset your cooldown so you slap more mines down. That's amazing. I mean, Breezy is one of the best items in the game, to be fair, but this ability is both great at just being disposed anywhere, being disposed as a combo piece in advance to prepare defensively, or, you know, however you want. Really, you can do whatever you want with it, and granting cooldown reduction to it, and then additionally 100% guaranteed evasion every time you dash. Holy crap, that is so good. Additionally, Limo's leave obviously is quite nice because you just dash around the place like you don't give a shit while evading everything. It's so freaking good. Unenhanced, Magma Rush deals a decent amount of damage at a decent coverage. It grants you a poor amount of signature charge generation. Oh, very nice, very nice. It's very easy to hit and versatile. Burns enemies for even more damage. And the most important part, it can destroy chests in a stylish way. Bestia. All the way to the very top. This thing is amazing. I love it. What do I mean by that? Well, you essentially deploy a mine on a timer. When enemies walk into it and, well, they make contact, the mine explodes immediately. You can destroy chests immediately when they spawn. I'm talking about those large chests, right? Either in boss rush, that's my preferred way of doing it, or just in the regular game mode after beating a mini boss, that fat ass, or a boss for that matter, that fat ass chest drops heavily to the ground, right? And you can use a very weighty Magma Rush, just time it just right. So the millisecond, the nanosecond, the picosecond, that fucking chest will hit the ground and the animation will play out. Your mind will go off and you will hear them bing, and you can see all those gems flying your way and shit. You can be halfway across the map at that point and it'll still detonate the chest and you will still hear it and it'll still feel orgasmic. I love that feeling. It's so fucking good. You should try it, absolutely. When enhanced, additionally, Magma Rush has great coverage and is even easier to hit. What is there not to love about this ability besides the fact that it is undefined and not a projectile? I don't know, it's amazing. I love this thing. Moving on to Flare Rush. Flare Rush is a projectile dash Arcana, which means that Grease Boots are gonna do it a great favor to deal more damage. Cooldown reduction, great. Enhancing it, that's more damage, great. Not having to buy an enhancement, woo, cool, great. We probably won't switch this out once we have acquired Grease Boots, but hey, it's still a lot of extra base damage essentially, so that's very nice. Elemental Point is nice because this is a bit of a combo piece. It's sort of a line-based skill shot. You want to be close to your enemies, you Flare Rush right up their face, and then you follow that up with other abilities, usually also like fire abilities, something like that, and you can ditch out great amounts of damage, and you get a lot of core reduction back. What can I say? What is there not to love about this combination? Sucker Cleats likewise are quite useful for ditching out damage. They just make you do whatever you're already doing better, and Reinforced Braces are a weird pick, but they can definitely work if that is what you're looking for, as these are projectiles with a rather lengthy travel time and a rather long range and quite the angle. It's not like 3 straight lines, but you can definitely catch a lot of projectiles using Reinforced Braces. It's nothing that I would personally ever really do, but man, it sounds very intriguing to watch. I would love to watch that. You can essentially play bodyguard for someone else using that. When unenhanced, this ability deals poor damage, unfortunately, at a decent coverage, granting you a poor amount of signature charge generation, which is nice. It's a little bit clunky and sluggish to hit, but it burns enemies additionally. So yeah, nice damage all around. When enhanced, it deals slightly more damage at slightly more coverage. I would say this is above middle of the pack. Definitely pretty good, noteworthy ability. You could put it in beta, I could be convinced, but it has fire support. There's just so much fire support and so much dash and movement support and extra damage. So this ability, it will deal a lot of damage over the course of your average run, and it has quite the nice range. It has quite nice applications, such as the niche projectile destruction one, or using it as a very very medium ranged ability. So I'm gonna keep it in A tier for now. Moving on to the next element. This is gonna be quite interesting. Let's start things off with Air Burst right here. Air Burst is a melee dash Arcana. That means we love to deal damage. Jumper cables? Yes, please. More DPS. Greased boots? Oh, yes. Daddy. Please. Greased boots are so good. Are so incredibly good. This is the first ability on the list where you really want greased boots right away. Start off with them and you will have a way different time from a user who's just using the unenhanced version of this ability and tries to find the enhancement somewhere along the way in the shop. You plebeian, how dare you? Do you not know the power of air burst? This thing is incredible with greased boots because the enhancement of this ability, it's essentially a standard ability. It's so good, it very closely resembles a certain a certain signature slash standard ability in the game. One of the most busted abilities in the game, and Airburst is no different. This thing is so freaking good when enhanced. Unenhanced, still quite powerful, but get those greased boots, they get you so much value, an incredible amount of damage and versatility and defense at the same time. Absolutely worth the price. The elemental point are likewise okay, you can definitely do that. You can use this as a camera piece, but I like to use it as a main damage tool. Well, main damage tool maybe is a little bit over the top, but it's definitely a very nice damage tool. So naturally, soccer clades are very useful, and so is a dark katana. Get that shit. We can use Dark Katana on this dash. It's a melee ability. It's classified as melee. We can do it. We can use Soccer Cleats and Dark Katana, get that massive, massive damage boost. So we are way ahead of a lot of other dashes on this list. And that puts this very firmly already at the top of A tier. But let's actually evaluate the rest of it here to find out where this is gonna potentially go. The unenhanced version of this ability deals decent damage, decent coverage, and it has a poor amount of signature charge gain, which is nice. It's also very easy to hit, arguably a very beginner-friendly dash. However, against certain enemies that a beginner may not know yet, like a Lancer, for example, you can definitely screw this up still. So I wouldn't classify this as super-duper easy to hit, get it right every time. Absolutely not. But for someone who's an intermediate Wizard version player, yeah, for sure, definitely. When enhanced, additionally, this ability has a great amount of coverage, which is really the main selling point. Grants you a tiny bit of signature charge generation, which is aight, and it slows enemies. Again, that's a great selling point for this particular ability. As I said, this is a standard ability when enhanced. It's so fucking good. I would probably put this in S tier if the enhancement were to deal more damage. It doesn't, unfortunately, so it's more of a zoning tool at that point. Say you are somewhere between stage, or rather dungeon 2 and dungeon 3, or dungeon level 2 and dungeon level 3, however you want to word it. This is not going to be one of your main damage tools due to that lack of damage when enhanced. Unfortunately, I would love to put this into S tier, but it's just not quite that good. Very top of A tier for now. You should feel honored, Mr. Airburst. I salute to you. Moving on to Razor Burst. Where are you? Right here. I know this as the bear claw from my teddy bear video. I just can't get that out of my head. Or the, like from the cat video also. It just seems like a claw arcana more than anything else. It's so vicious. I like Razor Burst quite a lot. It is an undefined dash arcana. Jumper cables are quite nice because this is a very high damage ability comparatively to other dashes. Greased boots, naturally for the same reason, are very, very nice. Again, incredibly useful. You want them right away. If you had any of these items, if you could choose between any of them, you would absolutely pick greased boots every time. Elemental pointer is nice. It's definitely a combo piece. You want enemies to get closer to you, or you want to be very close to enemies and then have to get your positioning just right to hit this into the middle of enemies, essentially drawing them into this vortex and dealing a bunch of damage to them. Elemental Pointe can definitely help out with following up this ability and then getting your stuff, getting your combo pieces ready again afterwards. Because you always have a standard and a signature, you can have two individual combos. Say the first combo is dash plus standard plus basic arcana, and then by that point you would probably have your dash up again, and then you can do the second combo, which is dash into signature into basic arcana, and then the third combo would probably just be your signature ability, something like that. You can do a lot with that. I feel like Elemental Pointe, it definitely owns a place in this list. for this particular ability. Soccer cleats additionally are quite nice. Again, we just take whatever this ability does already and we capitalize on it, making that better. Soccer cleats makes us deal more damage, therefore it's a great recommendation. The unenhanced version of this particular ability features a decent amount of base damage at poor coverage, unfortunately, granting a poor amount of signature charge generation. But it is clunky to hit, as it is a trap ability essentially. You have to lure enemies in or wait for them to climb up, which doesn't usually work very well, as they are moving at different travel speeds, or to different places, or attack from different ranges, so they don't walk far enough so they walk into the trap. Generally what you want to do is you want to walk up to them, you want to group them up, and then dash perfectly, which is actually quite hard to do in this particular ability, so that Vortex will be in the middle of your enemies, drawing them in. It also slows enemies. This is quite a roller coaster of an ability. It's always an up and down and up and down. The slow is quite nice. If you can actually connect the ability, the damage is quite nice. If you can actually connect the ability, so you see, it's a bit of an up and down. When enhanced, it deals a lot more damage, which is very nice. Even though it is quite clunky, I would say, it is a very good ability and quite reliable once you're actually capable of hitting this reliably. Quite a great damage source. I would put it right here. It might even arguably be better than Airburst due to its damage dealt and due to the utility offered here, but I personally just much prefer Airburst because it's so accessible. You can make this work right away. It's going to be very useful right away, and a Razor Burst is a lot more situational. You have to be able to group up enemies. If you can't, oh right, and not only that, but also you will have you have to be able to dash into a certain direction without taking damage, falling into a pit and the likes. With those rooms where enemies spawn from all sides, that's a whole lot harder. I much prefer having Airburst, so I can just take like a third of that room, bash them into a wall, kill them off right then and there, and then I have my back free. I can stand with my back to the wall and let the other 2/3 of the room come from the front or from the sides towards me. That way I just cover one of the flanks immediately, and I have a much easier time to clearing out a room, whereas with Razor Burst it's really not that simple. So I have to put it down here, unfortunately. I still believe it's better than Flares and any of these similar abilities due to its damage output and the nice status ailment, which, I mean, slow, you don't talk a whole lot about in the context of Wizard of Legend, but slow is quite fun, especially with a pandemic pouch. You can do some fun shenanigans around slow. Also helps you to wait out your cooldowns, and therefore it's essentially an extra setup piece. Let's move on to Vortex Trap, the actual Vortex. I really don't know. This ability is so niche and weird and special. It's a projectile dash Arcana. That means jumper cables and greased boots are nice. Cooldown reduction generally definitely works alright. It has multiple charges right out of the gates, so the more cooldown reduction you get, the more charges you can simultaneously carry, and you will never really find yourself being depleted of all of them. Greased boots with this particular ability isn't incredibly impactful. Off the top of my head, I wouldn't actually be able to tell you what the enhancement does. It's that type of ability, right? You want to primarily push enemies around with this one. You don't want to control them, you don't want to kill them, but you want to shove them into pits. Ideally, this ability is very hard to use though. So we just try to mitigate that horrendous ease of use by building items, building relics that not capitalize on your damage output, but on the, well, lack of ease of use. Try to make it more accessible. Give it more cooldown reduction so you can use it more often, so you can learn how to use it better, or you just spam it everywhere. It's a stationary trap, essentially, but with multiple charges. Imagine it as a Magma Rush, but in way worse and way less reliable at a tiny range per trap. And it also pushes enemies around. You can chain these, but generally it's just very hard to use. So jumper cables and grease boots help with the cooldown reduction. Ring of Reserves helps with extra charges, so that's indirect cooldown reduction. Soccer Clades would help with the damage output, but I would only recommend building that if you actually know what you're doing on this particular ability. Unlike me, I really don't know how to make this work, especially in rooms with enemies coming from like a circular pattern or like a triangle pattern to approach you, it's very, very hard. You get surrounded very quickly. You have to be incredibly smart with your decision-making process. Reinforced braces, on the other hand, is an item that you can definitely build for this particular ability, as it is a projectile, so they can these airstreams, when a trap goes off, when it's procced, they can actually destroy projectiles for you. So if you're an absolute master at using this ability, Reinforced Braces, I would imagine, can actually be useful. Boots of Frenzy can definitely help you out because, well, you have unlimited charges of this ability. You just stack them everywhere and hope that enemies will not be pushed right up your face being able to hit you and hope that enemies will die, or you just infinitely chain between two of these traps if you can actually do that. I imagine this is a very high skill ability, high skill, high reward, I would say, but only for regular enemies, not so much for bosses or mini bosses, and you really have to know what you're doing. Additionally, I would say Boots of Celerity can just help the average player out a lot, especially when combined with Ring of Reserves and a Gyroscopic Inkwell. That way, you'll be dashing around a lot. You'll have a lot of different charges. Every time you do use one of them, you get to keep a little bit of signature charge generated with the Gyroscopic Inkwell, and you get to deal a little bit of extra damage for a short period of time using the Boots of Celerity, which is nice. That definitely helps out a lot. Doesn't help making this particular ability more viable, it just helps you mitigate the loss of, you know, having a very good dash ability. Unfortunately, that's all good I can say about this ability, but let's get into the specifics of this ability, starting off with the unenhanced traits. When unenhanced, Vortex Trap deals a decent amount of damage, surprisingly enough, at a very poor coverage, granting you a poor amount of signature charge generation. Hey, at least that's something. It's very clunky, very sluggish to hit, but when you can actually connect this thing properly, it can be used for chain reactions. Oh, isn't that epic? Yep. Well, it's pretty fucking hard, because even a single enemy stepping on one of those traps, one of those vortexes, prematurely, he can ruin everything. He can ruin absolutely everything, your entire setup. Say you wanted a large group of enemies, right, to step on one trap and then be ping-ponged between the two of your traps to eventually die. That's not going to work if a single one of them is going to be there preemptively before the rest. That's just going to ruin absolutely everything. The rest of them might not even be hit by the gust of air, the stream of air shot from the second trap shot out afterwards. Anyway, rambling on and on and on. This ability is very hard to connect. When enhanced, it has better range and it is slightly easier to hit, although the core problem remains the same. This thing, although it is so hard to use, is definitely better than these two abilities. I would even put it in A tier if it were easier to use, but it's just so incredibly hard to use. It's hard to ignore that fact, so it's gotta go into B tier. For a lot of people, this is probably C or even D tier. I still believe in this ability. I still believe that it could be very good, but it's more of a user error, right? You have to be able to use it to its core strength, and I believe firmly that the vast majority of Wizard of Legend players, myself included, cannot do that. Moving on to Wind Salvo, right here. Wind Salvo, by any stretch of the Arcana category here, is very similar to Flare Rush. It's essentially just a wind carbon copy of the Flare Rush ability, so these are gonna share very similar traits. Wind Salvo is likewise a projectile dash Arcana. Goes pretty well with jumper cables, greased boots, elemental point A, soccer cleats. Of course, these are just the go-to abilities for damaging dashes, to just deal slightly more damage or deal it faster or do what they're already doing but do it better. These are just the most average, I'd say, consistent dashes, right? Projectile, I'm gonna deal some damage occasionally, and I'm gonna be somewhat useful abilities. Let's call them that. Additionally, Reinforced Braces, like as with the Flare Rush ability, can definitely be useful. They likely won't. It's a little harder to start projectiles with this ability. I find it clunkier for sure. As with Flare Rush, you have different angles that are covered by the ability naturally, whereas with Wind Salvo, it's essentially just a few straight lines, right? And oh man, it's very hard to be consistent in dodging or in destroying projectiles. You have to dash towards the projectiles as well, whereas Flare Rush, it does kind of cover a lot more area in front of your character when Salvo doesn't whatsoever. It's like a pinky finger in front of your character, so you have to be incredibly precise with your timing to make reinforced braces work. You could do it, say you have a signature charge generation build and you are stuck with this ability for some reason, you could absolutely do it. But, it's a little rough. The unenhanced version of this particular ability deals decent damage at a poor coverage, granting you a poor amount of signature charge generation, you know the drill. It is a little bit clunky to hit, definitely clunkier than Flare Rush in my opinion, even though Flare Rush can already be a little bit hard to hit unless you are standing right in front of your target. Same pretty much, same approach counts for Wind Salvo. You should absolutely be very close to your target, not far away, not even a medium distance away, just be very close, use it, and you should be good to go. You can even hit multiple targets at once with this, which is quite nice, unlike Flare Rush, which is a little more single target focused, I'd say, or multi-target focused, but you just tickle each of them, and with Wind Salvo you can pretty much just hit all of them. It's a line-based skill shot more so than the piercing line-based skill shot more so than the Flare Rush ability. It also grants you a poor amount of projectile destruction. Of course, it's a projectile ability. When enhanced, it deals more damage, and it grants you more signature charge generation, which is nice. Still not more than average in my book. Definitely not as smooth as Flare Rush, I feel. I definitely prefer Flare Rush a whole lot due to, well, it's fire, and fire comes with a lot of benefits, and wind doesn't at all, and this is clunkier to hit and feels worse with certain items like reinforced braces, and feels worse with builds. You have to control enemies a whole lot more. It's not just, hey, let me quickly deal a little bit of damage. Nah, not really. That's what Flare Rush is good for. So I feel like Flare Rush is just superior overall. Let's move on to a much more exciting element with Earth, of course. Spike Track is the first Arcana on my list. Spike Track is an undefined dash Arcana, and quite a renowned one at that. It works incredibly well with cooldown reduction, as this thing has very high base damage. So you capitalize on what you already do great and become exceptional. Unconditionally great. Jumper cables, grease boots. Hear me out. More cooldown reduction, more damage, kill everything twice as fast, 3 times as fast, 4 times as fast. This thing is so freaking good. You essentially kill enemies early game in 2 hits. 2 hits of this dash, that is, which is crazy to think about. It's so freaking good. Jumper cables, I wouldn't say are super essential. You can definitely run them if you find them, but I would highly prefer greased boots because the enhancement of this ability gains a lot more coverage, which is pretty much the only thing it's lacking overall. It's just one line. It's a line-based skill shot with one very narrow line, unlike Wind Salvo, for example, which is also quite narrow, but at least hittable. Spike Track can easily be missed if you don't know what you're doing, so enhancing it right away will help you out a lot at that. Elemental Pointe is also very nice for cooldown reduction. This is a very good combo piece. You want to be very up close to your enemies so you can hit this. Guaranteed, especially towards bosses, because this is the boss killer dash in the game, and then you just combo up a bunch more, and with Elemental Pointer you'll have it up in no time. Soccer cleats are a no-brainer. Fiery Paintbrush with this one is a very special no-brainer because this thing has insane amounts of damage, and it's pretty much just one large fat ass hit, and Fiery Paintbrush loves to capitalize on that. If I could, I would absolutely build a Dark Katana with this as well. It would be positively insane. Boots of Frenzy are very nice, even though I don't build them a whole lot with this ability. It's still one of the most busted damaging abilities in the game, and you can have a 0-second cooldown using the Boots of Friendly. Sorry, not the Boots of Friendly, the Boots of Frenzy, although this doesn't work in boss rooms because there's no regular enemies to kill, but in mini boss rooms you can absolutely do it, and you can just shred the mini boss just dashing back and forth non-stop. Breezy Grey Canvas likewise is insane for boss killing potential because it's a Limo sleeve on crack. You get 100% evasion while dashing, so you are right up the face of your enemy, you dash when they cast their stupid projectiles, you just ignore everything because you're evading everything, and then you might have a full reset on your ability from the secondary effect of Breezy Grey. Just doing it all over again. Potentially ad infinitum, right? This thing is crazy good. Speaking of Lemur's Leap, that's also pretty damn viable. As you want to get quite close to your enemy, you just ignore them entirely, spike trick through them. It's great. Evasion is fantastic. Chrono reduction is amazing. The unenhanced version has great amounts of damage. Not good, not decent. It's great. And a decent coverage with a decent amount of signature generation, surprisingly quite a lot. It is a little clunky to hit, but hey, you'll get used to it. It is pretty much one of the best abilities in the game, especially relatively to these other dashes here, damage-wise. When enhanced, it has a great amount of coverage, I'd say, as you essentially double the length of this ability. It doesn't get any wider, so it's still as hard to hit as previously. But hey, you can now damage targets in front of you. You don't just have to end perfectly behind them to get this ability right and not be stun locked into oblivion. It's also easier to hit for that reason. This thing is S tier all the way. I would say it's even better than Magma Rush. Even though Magma Rush is so unconditional, right? This thing, if it were a waifu or something, it would unconditionally love you no matter what. Spike Track would be, what is it called, like a tsundere or something? Like a super aggressive, super loyal, but yeah, incredibly aggressive. That's how I would imagine Spike Track. But now we are sidetracking into some really weird realms, so let's get back to Wizard of Legend. Starting things off, or continuing on rather, with Toxic Trap. Toxic Trap is an undefined dash Arcana. Probably an ability a lot of people have never used before, or have used once or twice and then never came back to. It is yet another trap ability, so very similar to what we've already had with the Vortex Trap, with Magma Rush, and the third ability, Razor Burst, I believe it's called, right? Toxic Trap therefore combines decently well with jumper cables and grease boots yet again, even though grease boots are non-essential for this item. You want grease boots pretty much just for the chrono reduction. The enhancement pretty much doesn't do anything for you in terms of damage dealt or versatility or defensive capabilities gained. So that's a little bit of a red flag here already. Jumper cables is probably better than grease boots here, actually. Soccer clates are okay for ditching out slightly more damage. And now for the main items: Devi's Bug Spray, Pandemic Pouch, and Hunter's Stiletto. This is an ability that can deal damage. However, you essentially throw a vial of poison into the air, and then when it hits the ground, it'll deal like 15 damage or so, which is nice, and then it'll leave behind a puddle of poison and a rather large AoE poisoning enemies. Poison is a very bad status effect. It deals a great amount of damage over a very long period of time, however. It takes forever to deal its damage, in other words. It takes forever to go away so you can reapply it, in other words. So the DPS here is horrendous. It's gotta be way worse than burn, it's gotta be way worse than even shock. And that means a lot, really, because goddamn, what do you do with poison, right? It takes forever to kill, right? It doesn't stun lock enemies. It damages them way too slowly to ever interrupt them realistically. And the main selling point of Toxic Trap is it is one of the few poison-related abilities in the game used to apply poison. That's the main application of this ability, but you can't reapply poison to someone who's already poisoned, and poison takes forever to go away. So you see the issue with this ability already. The vial deals damage, but only the vial. So even if I were to put a lot of chrono reduction on this, and I would have these traps, quote unquote, everywhere, i.e. the poison puddles, they only poison enemies, and you can't re-poison a poisoned enemy. You lose a lot of damage and a lot of gold by building a lot of chrono reduction with Boots of Frenzy, for example. Sure, it may look nice having an entirely purple arena, but it won't help you out whatsoever, especially into Sura, into later stages as well. The damage is very piss poor, the poison takes way too long, it doesn't help you at that point whatsoever. Speaking of Sura, he's obviously immune to all status ailments, right? So literally no point using this. But if you had to, if you wanted to, I would highly recommend you pick up Devi's Bug Spray for extra poison damage. So at least you can tell yourself that it's worth it. Pandemic Pouch, so you spread the poison in even more puddles. just so you don't have to enhance this ability essentially. And Hunter Stiletto, which is probably the only good item that you could ever use with a poison build, because it makes you deal more damage when you hit an enemy that is affected by a status ailment such as poison, which takes forever, as I've already mentioned plenty of times. So it grants you a lot of extra damage with your other, way more important abilities, which might actually give Toxic Trap a very niche use. Without Hunter Stiletto, I would straight up put this into worst of the worst tier, just reading off of the items and what it actually does. Looking at the stats, i.e. the vial for the most part here, the unenhanced version of this ability deals decent damage with a vial for a dash, that is, at a decent coverage, granting you a very poor amount of signature charge generation, which is better than none. It only hits once, technically, and it poisons the enemies. You can view those last 2 points as both disadvantages or advantages. However much you actually like poison, and I would say high skill, low effort, low impact dashes. When enhanced, this ability has a great coverage, surprisingly, because you throw 2 vials, one behind or on top of you and one in front of you where you're dashing. This essentially doesn't grant you much more DPS though, because generally the targets you want to hit are not in front of you. Well, they are in front of you, but once you dash, they'll be behind you, not in front of you, in front of your dash location, that is. So, looking at the vial, only one of them will hit the enemies that you likely care about. They can't be repoisoned by the second puddle, so what's really the point of enhancing this? I don't know. It is easier to hit, however, but generally I would recommend not even enhancing this ability. This thing is very, very disappointing. Even though it can deal damage, it's still worse than Ignition Drive, in my opinion. And Ignition Drive, like I said, in my book, is a great combo piece. But Toxic Trap isn't even that. It's pretty fucking terrible. And unless you have a Hunter Stiletto, or unless you're playing a very specific build, where the main purpose of your build is to apply status effects, I would not build it at all. Let's move on to my personal favorite dash in this game by a landslide, Entangling Vines. Speaking of poison abilities, this is how to do it right. Entangling Vines is an undefined dash Arcana. It pairs up exceptionally well with jumper cables and greased boots, even though there's a caveat. There's quite the asterisk with greased boots. Jumper cables are great because this ability already does any and everything that you could possibly want a dash to do. It grants you utility, versatility, defensively, offensively. It grants you status ailments, it grants you a large amount of damage. This can straight up eliminate enemies right away, pulling them into pits, which is incredible. None of the other dashes on this list, with the exception of Air Burst, right here, could have really done that so far. Pushing or pulling enemies into pits, well, beside the Vortex Trap here, which is just way too hard to do and therefore not really worth it, is incredibly simple with Entangling Vines. Therefore, you can build a ton of stuff on this, especially cooldown reduction, such as with the jumper cables, but also grease boots can be exceptional. There's a caveat for the grease boots, that being if you have a push and pull build, you wouldn't want to necessarily upgrade this ability, as it will root enemies in place, so you can't move them afterwards. It'll still pull them into pits if you do it the right way. They will not stop in front of the pit being rooted there or anything like that, or rooted first and then attempted to pull using Entangling Vines. No, they will actually be pulled first, and then at the destination location, they will be rooted and poisoned in place. That also means you can run the typical Devil's Bug Spray and Pandemic Purge, even Hunter Stiletto, which is so good on this particular ability, as it does everything, and Hunter Stiletto just makes it deal a lot more damage. It's like having a second pair of soccer cleats. So fucking good. And it poisons in a large AoE. You can poison as many enemies as you want. Sure, the Toxic Trap can do that too, but will it deal anything beyond that? Not really, right? Additionally, stones are amazing, except Frost Stone, because this is a melee ability with quite a tight range, so you want to get very up and close enough, very up and close to enemies, and you want to group them up, and for that, obviously, stones are amazing. You can even use a Venom Stone, for example, slap that on here, and gain even more value, or a bunch of different stones applying different status ailments. I would recommend not building Frost Stone for the aforementioned reason. Like poison may tick very slowly, but it'll still break frozen enemies free. You wouldn't really want that, though you can definitely play around it due to the very long innate poison duration. I am very happy with this particular ability. Let's look at the stats, because my lord are they sweet. The unenhanced version of this ability deals decent damage at a great coverage. It has essentially an invisible range. It's a phantom range around your character, but let me assure you the range is quite large, so it's very easy to pull enemies around you. It'll target all enemies in a very large circle around your character, pulling them close, dealing a large amount of damage to them, and potentially just pulling them straight up into either your setup, say a Magma Rush mine or something of the sort, or a pit. It'll pull them close to you, so they will likely allocate. They will likely be located in like a cone shape in front of your character, into your melee range. That is, so you can easily combo this with especially wind abilities, but other element abilities which usually have a very strong melee focus, but are very short ranged or hard to hit because of their lack of width and AOE. Well, now you have the perfect solution to your problem. Just pull them close, deal damage. You might even kill them along the way. Who fucking knows? This thing has decent damage, great coverage, great signature charge generation as well. It's easy to hit, it's very, very versatile, because you can pull enemies just to damage them and then keep walking into the direction that you dashed into, and you will get out of the situation easily, no harm done. Or you pull them close and follow that up immediately with a combo, like a Stone Fist or something like that. You have so many possibilities what you can do with this thing. It groups enemies up close to the player, and that's just really the largest quirk, but also the largest feature of this particular ability. When enhanced, additionally, you deal great damage, and you will root and poison enemies. On top of all of that, this thing is top of the top of S tier. In my personal opinion, it doesn't really get any better than this. Although it deals less damage than Spike Track, the infamous boss-killing dash, it is so much more versatile in how you use it. Goes with literally any build, all the time. I love this thing so much, and it's so creative too. You can do so many different things with this, like a poison spreading build with the Hunter's Clatter. That's something I've never really done. I usually use this for control in combo builds. I pull enemies closer, I follow that up with another combo, jump here, jump there, pull them close, another combo here and there and there, and I'm in love with it. You should absolutely try it if you haven't tried it out. Even the old version of this ability, which used to be you dash forth, and essentially in a cone in front of you, you will shoot out a bunch of vines dealing damage to enemies. It won't root them or anything, as far as I recall. That was very similar to Airburst. I would say even worse than Airburst, a little bit, probably in B tier. But even that one I absolutely loved, and ever since they reworked it to become this ability, it's like the most agitated, the coolest ability in the game, dash-wise. I love this thing so much. Alright, let's move on to the next ability, which is Tunneling Drive. Right here. Tunneling Drive is a projectile dash Arcana, which pairs up quite well with jumper cables, I would say, as well as greased boots. It's very similar to the Flare Rush and Wind Salvo. It's one of those ones, yeah. It's more similar to Wind Salvo than Flare Rush, definitely, because it's also multiple lines, but instead of wind, that moves very slowly, actually, you are, paradoxically, you are shooting very medium speed but high impact drills of stone, which is quite nice. Drills have a few innate properties that are very, very fun to toy around with. For example, they love to drill through multiple things. They pierce even through walls. They destroy projectiles very well. I love drills for that, and that's why we have a few additional items here, unlike the other two previous abilities. Jumper cables and grease boots are just the bare minimum here, right? Elemental Point A, again, you can use this as a combo piece. You can even use this as a reliable ranged ability, because they are quite fast, and they, most importantly, hit in a reliable manner at a very, very long range. Unlike Wind Salvo, which is just too slow, and Flare Rush, which is just too inconsistent with its its line shape, quote unquote. It's more of a U or a W shape, to be frank, on the Flare Rush, which is not that easy to hit at a long range, but still applicable. Here with the Tunneling Drive, we can definitely easily apply this at long range to destroy projectiles, or dispose of some enemies, or crowd control them, push them away, yada yada yada. Additionally, soccer cleats are very nice. Again, that's pretty standard, bottom of the line. And then we have a fun combination with reinforced braces plus Limo sleeve, or instead of the Limo sleeve, if you want to upgrade it with the breezy grey canvas. Because drills can easily pierce multiple projectiles. And with the Limo sleeve, you can just dash forth, destroy a bunch of projectiles, drill through your enemy, and rinse and repeat, avoiding all damage in the process and gaining a lot of projectile destruction capabilities, which you can, by itself, pair up very nicely with other items like the buckler, the bladed buckler. Whenever you destroy a projectile, you gain what? Signature charge, exactly. You can just keep doing that. I love doing that shit. It's really fun. Let's look at the specifics of this ability because they're a little less exciting, but we still have a few fun quirks in here. When unenhanced, this ability deals decent damage at a decent coverage. Surprisingly enough, I actually quite like it compared to the other two abilities. It grants you a poor amount of signature charge generation, yada yada yada. It's easy to hit, which is, again, very nice. It's like Wind Salvo if we actually fixed Wind Salvo, and it's actually quite fast, right? The projectiles fly actually quite fast, so you might even miss it if you're coming from a Wind Salvo standpoint or from the flares, which are also very, very slow comparatively. It can easily hit enemies through walls. That's quite a fun caveat, quite a fun fact here about drills, because they can literally go through walls. Any type of wall. However, they are drastically slowed in their current movement speed when they do that. You can even shoot them out of bounds, i.e. out of the map. And you will quickly find that anything is a wall in Wizard of Legend. Anything out of bounds is a wall. So you can't just shoot them between like these large gaps of air between two different rooms and actually ever reach the second room, but it's still quite fun to do, and sometimes even applicable in certain room layouts where you have very thin layered walls and you want to group up a bunch of enemies at the other side of the room. It definitely works for that. It makes this ability a little more versatile, even though that's more of a joke of a use application, but hey, you can still do it. When enhanced, they deal more damage and add slightly more coverage. I would say Tunneling Drive is definitely better than the flares, even though flares have more support from their element and status ailment, but Tunneling Drive overall is pretty damn solid, I would say. Moving on to Thunder Line with lightning. Unfortunately, in the lightning category, there's just too many names with line. I hope I'll get them right. I think Thunder Line is this one right here. Thunder Line is an undefined dash Arcana, which it's kind of hard to describe. It's kind of the toxic trap equivalent for lightning. Except you don't deploy a trap, you just dash and Odin or Zeus strike the earth behind you in a small area. It looks like you just escaped from a thunder strike rather than you having cast this yourself, right? So Thunderline is more of a utility ability than a damaging ability, but it does definitely deal quite a bit of damage. So jumper cables and grease boots are quite nice, especially grease boots because it's the same thing as for toxic trap. Not only will this happen behind your character, but also in front of your character, which actually is quite nice for this ability because the innate impact is not just a tiny vial, it's a rather large AoE, so you can definitely dish up more damage getting the upgrade, and therefore grease boots are a lot better on this particular ability than on the toxic trap. Core reduction is just nice for extra DPS, soccer cleats is just extra DPS, Indra's copper pipe is nice because then you can make your shock that this particular ability applies deal more damage, and Pandemic Pouch allows for it to spread, which is quite nice once you have the enhanced version of this, so you can just spread it through an entire room pretty much. Say you are covered from both flanks, from back and front, or from multiple sides. With a Pandemic Pouch you can easily spread the two innate impacts here, the shock, across the entire room, which is quite fun. The unenhanced version of this ability deals a decent amount of damage at a decent coverage. I would probably even call it a good or even great coverage. It's very similar to Toxic Trap, maybe even a little larger. The pop projectile signature charge generation is pretty much standard at this point. It is quite easy to hit and use, and it chunks enemies for a little bit of extra damage on top of its already decent damage. When enhanced, it deals more damage at a greater coverage. I'd say this ability is quite good. Probably not as good as these other abilities. Although, now is a great moment to decide between single target damage or AoE damage. I wouldn't say that you can make a very viable build just using Thunder Line, whereas with Flare Rush, I feel like I absolutely could. The problem with Thunder Line is it only strikes behind you, so you have to dash usually into enemies if you are covered, and that implies that you need the enhancement. Even with Greased Boots, the cooldown on this is a little long, the damage is a little so I feel like it's worse, but it's gotta be very close between the three of these, maybe even this one. Let's move on to Volt Tracer. That's an easy one, easily identified. I love this one so much. There's a particular boss rush video you should probably watch. Oh wow, I've made great use of Volt Tracer. This is such a fun ability. Not one of my favorites, bar none, but it's gotta be pretty close to the list. It's an undefined dash Arcana, which is one of those very high damage abilities, very similar to what we've already looked at in terms of Entangling Vines and Spike Track. These chug it in, pray, hit the target, kill them quickly types of abilities. So Jumper Cables, Greased Boots, Elemental Pointer, and Soccer Clades are of course here right away. One of the weirder picks here is, or one of the more refined picks is probably Greased Boots, which isn't incredibly essential to this ability, but it definitely adds a lot of extra damage, unlike Spike Track for example, which is by itself quite a great ability, but when enhanced, I mean, you don't really need the enhancement if you can hit this consistently, or if you're using this as a damage switch just for coverage or ease of use, whereas here with Volt Tracer it's straight up a lot of extra damage. So yeah, absolutely, Greased Boots is quite nuanced and you definitely want that. It's your favorite here among the list yet again. Probably even better than Soccer Clades, straight up just increasing your damage. Boots of Celerity additionally is quite neat, as all of the top contenders here are undefined Arcana, likewise, but without charges on them. This is the first one, first top contender, including, I would say, Airburst, that actually runs on a charge-based system right out of the gates, and where the charges are actually quite impactful to how you end up using this ability overall. So Boots of Celerity add a lot of extra damage in between dashes, but also between your dashes. Likewise, you could obviously run a Ring of Reserves additionally with this build. I would say the combination really makes it. I wouldn't necessarily build just a Ring of Reserves. I don't find that super useful, because then I feel like you always have a charge too many, if that makes sense, right? So you always kind of force yourself to use it, because you tell yourself, hey, I'm not using this ability, it's going to waste, there's a lot of DPS that I'm leaving behind, and then you overextend because of your subconscious. I don't really like that much. I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense, but if you have already acquired Boots of Celerity, might as well add a Ring of Reserves to the whole deal to seal the whole deal. Indra's Copper Pipe, furthermore, is also quite a nice item, as this is yet another ability that shocks enemies. Adds a tiny bit of extra damage on top of an already very stable construct. Speaking of a stable construct, the unenhanced version of Volt Tracer deals decent damage at a decent coverage, and granting you a poor amount of signature charge. It is somewhat clunky to hit, takes a little bit of getting used to because of the timing. It shocks enemies when you do, and I mean, the damage is really worth it, so you should absolutely learn this ability. It also feels very nice, the payoff is great, especially with certain fire plus lightning builds. Wink wink, look up the boss video, link link. Link link? Wink wink. When enhanced, this ability deals even more damage, at more coverage. It's so good, I want to put it in S tier, so damn bad, but the thing is, timing wise, it's not gonna be as useful as Airburst, I feel, because you rely on that timing. You don't have that instant satisfaction, you don't have that instant crowd control, and instant, nope, you won't be attacking me, I will shove you into the wall and then finish you off. You have to wait for your after image to strike the enemies, and only then will you effectively apply crowd control. So it can possibly be S tier, it must go underneath Airburst, but they are very similar. I would say Volt Tracer has a lot more potential, damage-wise, an insane a mine of potential even. Very comparable to Spike Track with things like Boots of Celerity and Soccer Clades and the Copper Pipe. There's just so much support inbuilt, and it's lightning, so Ebonwolf's Cloak and other items are applicable as well. This thing is so good, but unfortunately not quite S tier. Shockline is next on my list, which is this very forgettable ability. In fact, fun fact, I quite literally forgot about this in my list. I had to go back on the first few takes of the tier list and actually evaluate this one because I completely forgot about this ability. Shockline is an undefined dash Arcana. And I really don't have much to say about this ability. It's essentially Ignition Rush, but without anything that makes Ignition Rush useful or good. Why would you want a shock status effect applicant in the game when shock isn't that great? It only hinders enemies. Like, it deals damage very quickly for a very short period of time in tiny ticks of like 1 to 2 damage dealt per tick. Which is nice for stun locking enemies for a short period of time. It's essentially just a stun, right? But this ability is too hard to hit to do the job. Ignition Rush, I literally use and I walk up to enemies and I just look at them intimidatingly, right? I just literally walk into them and they burn, okay? Whereas with Shockline, it's so much weirder to use. It's essentially a trap, a stationary trap, but it's only a single one. And while it does have an okay hitbox, it's so sluggish to use and so weird and not applicable to how this game actually works. It feels way too slow for how the game works. That is my final judgment on this ability. So while you can recommend some items to build with this, they are not really going to change the elephant in the room here whatsoever. They're not going to bring change to the greatest deal with this particular ability, which I can't even name. There's just too many problems with this ability. So my recommendations would include jumper cables and greased boots. Greased boots especially because then you might be able to deal some damage and hit this somewhat more easily. It's just another toxic trap, but way worse than toxic trap. It's not an AoE, it's a tiny ass line. Jumper cables likewise are just the broke man's greased boots. Ring of Reserves, again, that's one more cooldown reduction item, pretty much. Endra's Copper Pipe is actually the only damage up that I can actually recommend here. And Pandemic Poach, unfortunately, as depressing as it may seem, might be a good item with Shockline overall, because a line, turns out, isn't really that great at stopping enemies. They can just walk right around, and Pandemic Poach might make that line essentially explode to the sides, at least occasionally, and therefore potentially catch more enemies. Alright, let's get into the specifics. The unenhanced version of this ability deals no damage at poor coverage, granting no signature charge generation. So far so good. That's just the first ability in the tier list, right? It is clunky to hit, not easy at all, and it shocks enemies when you do. Yikes. Alright, the clunkiness, that's the issue here. Because what does this thing do if not apply status ailment? Well, nothing, really. It stops enemies in their tracks from walking towards you. Okay, but what if the enemies are not just coming from one direction? What if there's multiple? You can't even hide in this line. It's a line, okay? There's gonna be enemies from multiple sides, and you can only cover one angle, exactly one angle with this ability, and one straight angle at that. If they are coming diagonally, they might just ignore the line entirely. Unlike Ignition Rush, it is just non-applicable to pretty much most situations in the game. It's way too hard to hit, it doesn't deal damage at all, just applies shock, which is not that useful, because you would want a status effect to, well, not just stun enemies, right? Even when you dash forward into enemies, like with an Ignition Rush, or like with a Razor Burst, for example, this wouldn't stun lock the enemies, or even a Toxic Trap, man. Even a Toxic Trap would stun them for like a split second, but this one, it's just too hard to hit. It's a line. You're gonna miss it. You're gonna miss it on the vast majority of enemies unless they are literally lined up side by side, which never ever happens in this game. So you have to line them up, which is too hard. It's not an AoE. It should be like at least a cross or a plus sign or just a straight up circle AoE. but it's a line, so this thing is absolute trash. When enhanced, just gets more coverage, essentially. D tier, all the way. This is trash. Probably delete this from the game. You're better off than actually trying to make this work. It's never gonna happen. I never really run this, ever. I never want to. This is why you want an item like Greased Boots to exist, so you can swap it out if you accidentally get it or something, without having to regret anything too much. Moving on to something a lot less depressing with Second Line. Second Line, quite an interesting ability, quite high skill, very comparable to the Vortex Trap, and I would say probably Magma Rush and Toxic Trap as well. It's a lightning trap, so to speak. It's an undefined dash Arcana where you place down these little circles on the ground and you try to build a circuit by yourself, essentially. Those will try to connect to each other, and you can literally close the circuit, or you can just have some open lines. One thing that never changes is it has a start and it has an end, just one each. So make of that what you will. It's a very high skill ability, but it can generate a lot of value for you, very much unlike Vortex Trap. This thing goes very hard with cooldown reduction, so jumper cables, grease boots, ring of reserves. Where are they at? Breezy Grey Canvas, of course. Yep, those are just your go-to cooldown reduction items. Breezy Grey is also especially useful because you have a lot of charges on this thing. 3 by default, that's the most of any dash in the game. So not only Breezy Grey and Lemo's Leave are going to be very useful when dashing around a lot. You pretty much always have a dash charge open, and whenever you dash, you can just dash through projectiles and ignore them entirely, or dash through melee attacks, melee AoE attacks, just ignore them entirely because if so many dashes open, and Lemo's Leave is so busted, so is Breezy Grey. Additionally, you could of course combine your Ring of Reserves with Boots of Celerity for a ton of extra damage. That is an insane amount of extra damage from a dash. Damage not just 2 dashes, to your entire build. Soccer Cleats, of course, grant you a lot of extra damage too. Boots of Frenzy are incredible, especially with Boots of Celerity. You really want Boots of Frenzy on this particular ability. It's one of those few where this item is not just a joke, it's not just a meme, it's actually a legend. It's so fucking good. Gyroscopic Inkwell, likewise, is pretty good because you're going to be dashing around the place a lot, so you're not going to be losing a lot of signature charge. When unenhanced, this ability deals decent damage at a poor coverage, on average, I would say. Grants you a poor amount of signature charge generation. It is clunky to hit and takes a lot of practice to get right. However, when you get to hit it, it hits very often, potentially. Especially if you line up enemies in like some sort of line or puddle, and you just line all of these, let me call them generators, or these blobs of electricity up. So all of them will hit the same enemies. That is an insane amount of damage. When enhanced, it deals great damage. This thing is very good. Unfortunately, I don't use it a whole lot. I find it very hard to use, but that shouldn't be a criteria for its downfall, really. I would say it goes right here, probably. But I'm too bad at using this, so I'll put it right here. It should probably be a whole lot hotter up on the list, right? But yeah, that's just what I would rate it for now. For now, i.e. as long as I'm a skillless bastard on this particular ability. Moving on to the next element. Starting things off with Wavefront. Wavefront is an undefined dash Arcana. One of the most fun abilities in the game, one of the most well-liked, well-known abilities in the game. This thing is just such a blast to play with. It is super nice for knocking enemies around and for granting yourself a tiny little shield. So very utility focused and no damage here pretty much. But even if you were to use this as a damage tool, as long as you bump enemies into pits or against walls and you climb them up decently well with this ability and you know what you're doing, this thing will even do that incredibly well. It pairs up, therefore, very well with the jumper cables and greased boots. Greased boots are quite nice because then you get a larger shield, more defense, that's nice. That means more versatility into bosses especially, but also effectively more damage dealt, as you don't have to dash out of attacks, but you can dash into them more frequently with that tiny shield trying to tank them. Whenever you take shielded health damage, you won't be stun locked, you won't be interrupted in what you're doing as long as the shield ain't broken, which is amazing. Ring of Reserves, likewise, is super duper fun. Apparently, I'm not actually sure this item has charges, I cannot remember, but I wrote it down, so it's probably true. Soccer Cleats are great if you want this to be one of the main damage tools, and Lemo's Leaf, as well as the Breezy Grey Cameras, likewise, are pretty damn fun, so you can use this mostly for damage. Though I wouldn't say you need a Breezy Grey, it's kind of hard to hit. I wouldn't try to chain these. Ring of Reserves is just nice to tank multiple hits, but you essentially have to walk into an enemy, then dash into them for this to deal damage, then walk back out, because you have to be a certain distance away to hit this properly, then walk back in and dash again. That is a very lengthy and annoying process, and you're better off not spamming this ability to deal damage, but just using it whenever you have to gain shielded health, for example, or to knock enemies around. So while Lemo's Leaf and Breezy Grey are generally very nice, I personally, as insane as it may sound, prefer Lemo's Leaf over the Breezy Grey here. The unenhanced version of this ability deals decent damage at great coverage. Poor signature charge generation, it's easy to hit, it's very versatile, and it grants a shield and massive knockback. What are those knockers, milady? When enhanced, it grants you an even better shield, which is nice. Nothing super significant, but very nice. This is S tier, creme de la creme. Lovely ability, not for its damage dealing capabilities, but just because it's so freaking versatile, you can use it in any given build. It's super duper fun. That's really the main thing. It's incredibly fun, incredibly appealing, and it's very good. It's very hard to misuse this ability. Even when you just randomly dash out of attacks and stuff, it'll shield you, it'll help you out, even just for a few split seconds. This thing will be useful even on a complete noob who doesn't know what they're doing, who can never even hit enemies with these abilities like Spike Track, for example, or Magma Rush. It's very similar to Magma Rush in that it doesn't really matter how you use it, it's still going to be useful regardless. Frost Feint. Frost Feint is next on the list. Frost Feint is an undefined dash Arcana. It's more of a trap Arcana, really, than yet another damage ability. I wouldn't say it's utility focused either, it's more both. It's both damage and utility focused, so it's quite versatile right off the gates. You slap jumper cables on here, you slap other forms of cooldown reduction like a Ring of Reserves on here, like greased boots, and you get a ton of little decoys that'll distract enemies, that'll explode all over the place, dealing a ton of damage, freezing enemies. Elemental Pointe is very nice if you actually intend to use this as a combo piece. Of course, Boots of Celerity and Gyroscopic Inkwell work like an absolute treat if you already have a Ring of Reserves, or if not, well, still work like an absolute treat, and if you combine them with cooldown reduction especially, that's crazy good. Breezy Grey and Lemo's Leaf work very well when you're using this offensively. You can even use the decoys to destroy projectiles for you. Special Snowflake is one of my absolute favorite synergies with this particular ability in the game, because you leave decoys everywhere, enemies will attack them, the decoys will explode, the enemies will die, they explode, they freeze enemies around them, and it just looks so gorgeous. It's so beautiful and so fucking strong. It's beautiful. It's poetic even. Pandemic Pouch is great because it spreads the frost effect occasionally, which feels just fantastic. Soccer Cleats is amazing for damage dealt. You can probably already tell where this thing is going just by listening to me right here. Let's look at the stats though, because they are nothing to scoff at whatsoever either. The unenhanced version of this particular ability deals a decent amount of damage at a poor coverage. Granted, it has a very tiny range, probably even a more little range than Ignition Rush does. However, it grants a poor amount of signature charge generation, which is already better than Ignition Rush. It is easy to hit and very versatile, both defensively, offensively, just for utility. Whatever you need this to do, it can probably do that. Except in multiplayer it's a whole lot worse, because enemies will always target whoever's closest, so keep that in mind with your decoys. It creates a decoy that baits enemies. How cool is that? If that is not the most unique quirk on this list, what is, right? It freezes enemies additionally, It is, however, destroyed when hit by a projectile, so even just sneezing at these things, they will burst. They are quite literally made of glass, not of ice, right? They just shatter when sneezing at them. But hey, it's still amazing. When enhanced, you have more coverage, it's even easier to hit, much more versatile, and it creates 2 decoys. What more could you wish for? You get multiple charges, and every single charge you use up creates multiple decoys. Holy crap, that is so good. I don't really know where to put it though. It's not S tier, not by any stretch. No, it is great in terms of how creative this ability is, what you can do with it, and how it feels. It is not that easy to use. I would probably put it in one tier with the second line. It feels very similar, though it is probably better because of its crowd control capabilities than Razor Burst. Is it called Razor Burst? I always forget. Who cares? Who cares what they're called? You see the icons, you know the chillers, you can jump back. I can't, unfortunately. Let's move on to something a little more pleasant than forgetting about names of abilities you're rating. Bubble Blast. Bubble Blast is a projectile dash Arcana. And quite a fun one. Yet again, I find this super fun. Pretty much all of the water/ice abilities are insane fun. Just as a disclaimer, Bubble Blast is not a damage ability. It's not even really a utility ability. I don't know what it is. It's confusing, but it's certainly very fun to use. Probably more so a utility ability than anything else. This is probably supposed to be used for projectile destruction and keeping enemies slightly away from you, dealing a minute amount of damage to everyone around you. So you can slap jumper cables on here, you can slap greased boots on here, which is actually quite fun. I really love doing that, even though it's not super effective. Elemental Pointe is alright, so you get a charge back faster, Ring of Reserve, so even more charges, which is nice. Again, that's just beautiful, and you can destroy more projectiles doing that. Gyroscopic Inkwell is alright, because you do use this up a lot anyway to get rid of arrows specifically, but also mage projectiles, or to just slightly irritate lancers and the likes, rogues especially. Reinforced bracers can also definitely work pretty well for you, because it's a projectile dash Arcana, surprisingly enough. And the bubbles that you shoot out, that you launch from yourself, or however they just happen to appear in front of us, those are projectiles, so they destroy any projectile that touches them and get destroyed in the process, and with reinforced bracers they get even better at it. When unenhanced, it deals very poor damage, unfortunately. However, you can still use it as a damage tool. It's just very, very horrible at it, and it'll pretty much only damage a single target, because most of your bubbles, if you use this properly, will land and pop immediately on use in that single target, not killing it, very likely. It has a decent coverage, very fun coverage actually. I love the way this just spreads out. It grants you a poor amount of signature charge generation, better than Ignition Rush, hear me out. It is clunky to hit but easy to use, which is nice. And it grants you decent projectile destruction right out the gates. When enhanced, it has even more coverage, i.e. even better projectile destruction, because more coverage equals more projectiles caught by this random field of bubble mines, and it is easier to hit, even though I don't know why you would focus on that. I would say I would probably put this right here. It's really not that great because it is just so bad at dealing damage. It's just a very fun ability. It doesn't feel like it has a purpose in the game, but I don't want to bump it down to Toxic Trap. I wouldn't consider it that bad, because the main purpose of this ability is not dealing damage. On the other hand, it's worse than Searing Rush at blocking projectiles, so it probably goes right here. I find it very similar to Ignition Rush. Shit, they basically have the same shared asset, looking at that man inside there. So let's leave it right there. It feels a little bit unfair because I feel like it should be even worse. It should probably be down here with Toxic Trap, but I can't do my ball like that. Come on. Let's move on to Frostwing. Frostwing is amazing. I love this thing. It's such fun. It's my second favorite dash in the game. Super duper 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 fun. It's a projectile dash Arcana, which means amazing. You can slap what's the item called? You can slap that item that grants you crit chance on projectile Arcana on this, for example, if it deals okay damage, which in fact it does. Frostwing does deal a decent amount of damage. So jumper cables, grease boots are amazing. You get greater coverage, more damage, super duper fun. Jumper cables are self-explanatory, that's just more damage, being able to use it more frequently, both offensively and defensively. This is pretty much the epitome of an ability that you can only use offensively and defensively. It's not just either or, it's both at the same time, every time, guaranteed, pretty much. So yeah, that's great. Soccer cleats are great for ditching and damage. Ring of Reserves is great for offense and defense. Gyroscopic ink, well, can definitely work well for you because you do usually when you use this ability, you do have a greater goal amount of dealing large amounts of damage, so Gyroscopic definitely helps a lot with that. Reinforced braces are one of my favorites. They are very nice. They work very well together with the Frostwing projectile fan, especially when enhanced. Boots of Frenzy can definitely work. It's just such a mayhem. I've never actually seen it much in like a real important run, but man, this ability is just, it causes mayhem when you use it on screen, especially in multiplayer. Everyone will be like, what the hell just happened? And then with Boots of Frenzy, slap that on top and you just have fans of icicles going everywhere. It's great. I would love to see that. It's like Bubble Blast, but more the vicious kind of satisfying, not just the beautiful bubbles. Look at them fly around. Special Snowflake is one of my favorite combinations with the Frostwing, because oh lord does this deal a lot of damage, which means that it is very likely to kill enemies and keep freezing enemies. It does freeze them innately, and Special Snowflake will make enemies explode, enemies dying that is, and freeze everything around them. So you get chain reactions with this very, very easily. Pandemic Pouch therefore again helps you with that chain reaction extending across the entire room or the entire screen. The unenhanced version of Frostwing deals great damage. It has decent coverage, great signature charge generation. I really love it. It's clunky to hit but easy to use overall. Clunky to hit, i.e. it's clunky to maximize your damage output on a single target with this. It's very hard to maximize DPS output on single targets, especially when there's a large quantity of enemies in the room, because you wouldn't want your icicles to shatter preemptively. You want them to hit very important targets, so you freeze them. You get them essentially out of the game, so you have an easier time clearing the room without taking damage. So you wouldn't want to all in on a stomper, for example, with this, even though you would likely kill them very quickly. It's not generally worth it doing that. But when you actually have to do it, which is not all that often, say you have mini bosses that don't summon a whole lot, like Lancer for example, or Knight, or you have, well, just a boss that you want to kill and you are under a lot of stress, you may be on low HP and stuff, this is really not all that simple to hit overall. But when you do, oh my lord, is it rewarding. Not just personally, like in your brain, but also damage wise and signature charge gain wise, it's just so good. Grants you a decent amount of projectile destruction, as these are all projectiles, and freezes enemies. Hello? Can you start with the advantages? Also, here's the best part, and why it's gonna be going where it's gonna be going. It can destroy chests in a very stylish way. You know where this is going. All the way to the top. This is better than Spike Track in my opinion. Spike Track deals so much damage, so does Frostwing, but Frostwing is a Spike Track with the option to hit the entire room. It is so versatile. It's like I have one ability and I have two modes of that ability that I can switch between. And the switch is essentially your skill. What do you need and can you achieve it? This thing is crazy good, and it just feels amazing to me every time. I love this ability so much. When enhanced, I'm not even done yet, right? When enhanced, there's even more. It deals even better damage at even greater coverage with even better signature charge generation, and it is much easier to hit, especially on large rooms, but also against single targets, because it shoots just so many more fans. You might even be able to hit a single target with the majority of them, and then a few extra targets along with it. If I didn't sim for Entangling Vines so much, I would say this is the best dash in the game, straight up. Damage wise especially. this thing is so good. Synergy-wise, it's also so good. Ice support is pretty damn good. Water support is obviously pretty damn good. And then you have so many items that you can combine. There's so many builds that you can combine this with. Just keep in mind that freezing enemies just generates value by itself every single second. And you wouldn't want to break that freeze. Just freeze enemies, wait out some time so you get your cooldowns back up, and then follow up on them. Gank up on them. Don't just break the freeze right away, then you lose a lot of the value that this ability generates for you innately. Alright, final category. Chaotic Rift. Chaotic Rift is an undefined dash arcana. Notable synergies include Elemental Pointe, Boots of Celerity, and Gyroscopic Inkwell. As this particular ability does not have a cooldown at all, you can just abuse all of the broken dash relics that you can really only use on any other ability for a limited amount of time, but here you can just use it forever. Specifically Boots of Celerity, specifically Gyroscopic Inkwell. Well, arguably if you're just going to be dashing around the place, you're not going to be making a whole lot of signature charge, so Gyroscopic is not gaining a lot of value here, but still super duper good and makes it a lot more versatile in terms of the signature charge department. Boots of Celerity, more importantly, is just so fucking busted with this particular ability. And Elemental Pointe can definitely work out well if you have a Chaos build, because that's just so much combo potential, so much cooldown reduction, it feels unfair. This thing, it casts instantaneously as well, and it'll easily get you free of any given situation. It deals no damage at all, has no coverage, no signature charge generation. It's very easy to use, incredibly versatile. You can literally teleport through walls with this thing if you use it right. It doesn't have a cooldown, which means just abuse the hell out of it. It's pretty much instantaneous, so you can just get out of any given situation. Say there's like a Zeal tech flying your way with all those projectiles, just dash right through, man. You don't care. Or a Freya attack, just literally dash right through, because you're not dashing through, you're not being hit by the ice here, but you are iframing the whole thing. You are literally teleporting. You are disassembling at one point and reassembling at the other. So none of the projectiles that you just passed through, that you just dashed through, would have even touched you. You won't be frozen, you won't take any damage, you can't be interrupted while using this thing, pretty much. You can teleport through attacks, enemies, obstacles, and walls. That pretty much sums it up. This thing is broken, top off the top. To me personally, it's here, because it is not very fun. It's very, very broken, especially for high damage Chaos Arcana builds, or fire damage builds, but it's nonetheless not very fun, it's not very versatile. Well, it is very versatile, but it's not very versatile in terms of how you use it. You always use it a certain way, you always use it to dodge for the main part. If you dodge everything, you're never gonna be hit, right? It's like the mantra for damage abilities. Well, just kill everything and you can't be hit because there's no one shooting at you. But that doesn't make it any more interesting to me personally. Not more interesting than any of the other top contenders here anyway. Moving on to Chaotic Echoes. Chaotic Echoes is an undefined dash arcana, which combines pretty well with jumper cables and Elemental Pointe. You use this one quite a lot, and you do have multiple charges on it, so yet again, you can run Gyroscopic Inkwell, Boots of Celerity, which is actually very, very fun with this one because it has innate synergy. It is a damaging arcana with multiple charges. Use Boots of Celerity and you're going to be dealing mid damage. It's pretty damn fun. Breezy Grey Canvas and Limo's Leaf because, well, that's just completely broken. Stones because you're going to be in melee range. Pretty much any stone here works. Literally doesn't matter. Soccer Cleats because this thing deals a whole hell of a lot of damage. And Boots of Frenzy if you want your echoes to be dashing around the place with you together, because the greatest caveat is you can always use this dash and it always deals contact damage. Literally the most broken damaging dash in the game by far. It's so good. It's so freaking good. Looking at the stats, it deals great damage at a decent coverage. It grants you a great amount of signature charge generation. It's very easy to use, yet incredibly versatile in terms of dealing damage, but also stun locking enemies and pushing and pulling them around, theoretically, at least a little bit. It always does damage to enemies dashed through, at no cooldown whatsoever. Always contact damage. that is about the most broken that a dash ability can become in terms of ditching out damage. The actual dash ability is just the icing on the cake, using the echoes for a little bit extra damage and crowd control. This thing is S tier. Obviously, it's just way too strong. In terms of damage dealt, it's gotta be right here. Because this is my personal favorite, it's gonna remain at the very top. But man, Chaotic Echoes is just unfair. It has an advantage that none of the others here could ever even realistically achieve. Phantom Order is the final dash on my list, which is an undefined dash Arcana, and one that, again, is very forgettable. Regrettably so. Phantom Order I have used a whole lot more than, what is it called, Spark Line or something? I've already forgot the name. I forgot the damn name. It has a line in it, okay, shut the fuck up. Phantom Order combines OK with jumper cables, soccer cleats, boots frenzy, and special snowflake in my opinion. But that's really about it. That's really all that you can make of this. Special Snowflake may be a bit of an oddball here. I just feel like it adds a little bit of much needed damage. Same for the soccer cleats, same for the jumper cables. Boots of Frenzy just adds a little bit of mayhem effect, but it's not really a very viable item. That's not going to make this particular ability much stronger. It's just going to assure some spikes, especially during mini boss fights. Overall, this ability deals decent damage at great coverage. It has a decent signature charge generation. It's easy to use and versatile. It's the epitome of a ranged, typically projectile dash Arcana, where you just use it and forget about it and it deals some damage for you. Easy to use, versatile, easy to maximize DPS output on single targets. It's very much very similar to the Frozen Wings up here. You use it exactly the same way if you want to deal much damage to a single target. And it has great projectile destruction, which is pretty much the main reason I like using this ability. I do not personally use it a whole lot. I find it a little clunky because it does move enemies around a bunch and it doesn't feel exciting at all. I think I should put it in S tier, like right here, beside Frozen Wing, but I don't personally feel like it is. It has a lot of projectile destruction, so it's very, very, very similar to a lot of other abilities on this list. Way more projectile destruction than anyone else because of the huge coverage. It deals great damage, especially into single targets, but also for AoE, crowd control. It's very similar to Frostwing overall, but to me, personally, any day of the week I would prefer Frostwing over this ability. While it may have a lot of projectile destruction, you again destroy projectiles with very slow moving projectiles, so it's not very reliable. The range doesn't really matter much because it doesn't deal a lot of damage per target unless you hit a lot of shadow balls on the same target, so it's already below spike check for me. You don't just fire it off and forget about it because it might ruin combos, so it's below these two, and it's not as versatile at keeping you alive. It's not as versatile, period, or at whether it be about speeding you up or damaging during boss fights. Talking about boss fights, the projectile destruction isn't very useful in boss fights because it's a little slow and sluggish. I feel like top of A tier is just the right spot for this particular ability. To recap here, my absolute favorite dash Arcana in the game are, in order, by descending order, Entangling Vines, Frostwing, and the third one is probably Ignition Rush, to be honest, although I do use Volt Tracer and Toxic Trap a whole lot as well, but I don't really love them by any means. Just Volt Tracer feels insane with a very fast combo build. Look up the boss rush, really. I promise you will not be disappointed. I think it's number 5 or something. And with that out of the way, that concludes our tier list. So, until next time, goodbye.